Welcome to this Nightwatch tutorial where I'll be teaching you how to use Nightwatch.js as a tool to write automated browser accessibility tests. This tutorial is part of a series of Nightwatch test automation tutorials I'll be posting on my channel, so be sure to click on the subscribe button down below to be notified of future lessons. So why is web accessibility testing an important part of quality assurance? Well, as of posting, court rulings in the United States have been interpreting Title III of the Americans with Disabilities Act to apply to websites. And this means that they can be considered places of public accommodation. If your website is deemed significantly inaccessible, it can be found to be discriminatory against people with disabilities and violate Title III of the ADA. And this can result in civil penalties. More importantly, it's just good design and it's the right thing to do. So, what are our test cases? How do we test if our website is accessible? There are a set of guidelines called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG 2.0 Level AA, that seem to be favored by the Department of Justice, but there is nothing 100% prescriptive yet. You can read about them on w3.org, but there's also a tool called Axe that bakes these accessibility checks into an API. I've built on some existing packages to allow you to easily write automated accessibility tests using Nightwatch.js custom commands, which we'll get into now. Links to the source code can be found in the description down below. So the custom package we're going to be using is called Nightwatch verbose, and you can get that on npm. Here you can see the README. And what makes this different than some of the other packages that have already been developed is that the output is more verbose. Here's some example outputs down below. So here's what you get on a pass. Now Thank you. This is a fork off the Nightwatch Axe package, and I've just changed it a little bit to make it more verbose. I changed the reporting a little bit in my version so that each pass tells you how many elements were checked against each one of these rules. And in the original version, the assertions wouldn't report all the rule failures because the execution would stop at the first test failure. I've changed the reporting, as you can see here, so that it lists each failing DOM element and rule violated as a separate test case. And I find that helps with remediation because you know all of the problems right up front. So now let's go look at the tests. So here I have a sample Nightwatch.js test project. I cover how to set up your first Nightwatch test in a previous video that you can find if you subscribe to my channel, but let's still go over the basics. So getting a Nightwatch.js test project set up is fairly simple. You start with a Nightwatch.json configuration file. Here you can see where you specify your source folders. I have them all mine in test. You can create your page objects and specify the path to those. Any global behavior can be specified in a globals path. And in our example today, we're going to be using custom commands. And as you can see, I've pointed the custom commands to the node module's Nightwatch verbose source commands folder. This gets installed when you run npm install inside the source code directory here, and it goes out and gets the Nightwatch verbose package off of npm. We're not going to be starting up Selenium, so I have the start process equal to false. And we will be using WebDriver, so I have that set to true, and I have the server path set to my Chrome driver. On Mac, you might need to exclude the .exe portion, and I'm going to keep the 9515 default port, and we're going to be using Chrome as our browser. Let's just take a quick peek over at globals.js, which is another important one. Here I have my before and after functionality, which is used commonly through all the tests, where I just start my Chrome driver and then stop it when I'm done. So now let's get into some testing. In my example below, I've broken out the tests into an accessible and an inaccessible test just for some easier examples here. So in the module exports here, I'm using the Nightwatch feature for tagging, which lets you control what part of your test suite to run, which we'll get into in a second. I've named the test accessibility site example. In Nightwatch, your entry point is this browser object that gets fed in, and you can just chain all of your various actions and assertions here. So this .url command is going to take us to the w3.org website where they have an example of an accessible website. And just to show you that you can mix different types of assertions into your test, I'm just doing a vanilla non-accessibility assertion of the title of the website, which is Welcome to City Lights, accessible homepage. And then after that is where we get into the real fun here. So to use our custom commands, we're going to type in this axe inject. And that's going to give us access to our custom commands, which is my npm axe verbose library. So after you call axe inject, you can call axe run, which is going to allow you to run those WCAG accessibility rules on whatever DOM element you choose. Here I'm choosing the body, which is going to basically scan everything that's found in the DOM within the body. So if you don't want to assert each individual control on the page, you can do a high level element like the body. But best practices also say that if you're going to be writing several tests, which you should, when you transition from like one page state to another. For example, if you're logging in to a website and you don't specify a username and password and you want to test that the validation UI is accessible, you're going to want to maybe just check a smaller portion of the page instead of everything. And if you want to be more specific, this rules collection will allow you to specify what rules to run specifically or what rules that you'd like to exclude. So sometimes people aren't as finicky about the contrast settings, and maybe they don't want to be warned about those all the time. So maybe they'll exclude the contrast rule set. And then once you're done with the test, you just call end. So let's go ahead and run our accessible test to see what that output looks like. So we're going to type in Nightwatch --tag accessible. And that's going to go to that W3C org webpage of an accessible site. All right, and as you can see, we have a running accessible site example, and it gives us all of the checks it did. And here we see some like ARIA hidden body, color contrast, duplicate ID ARIA, duplicate ID, empty heading. So what I improved here is the count of how many elements were checked, because on the previous library, it would just tell me I passed, but I was concerned maybe it wasn't checking all the controls I thought it was. So this count helps me determine if anything looks a little bit odd, like if it's not counting enough controls, maybe I didn't use the right selector or something like that. All right, so now let's see what a failing accessibility test looks like. So let's head over to inaccessiblespec.js. And here I'm using the Nightwatch tagging feature once again. This time I'm labeling this inaccessible so we can run our inaccessible tests in isolation. I've labeled this test inaccessible site. And again, we're going to use the URL parameter to head back over to the w3.org website. This one is their example of an inaccessible web page. We're going to start off by asserting that the title is the inaccessible homepage example. So again, we're going to call ax inject and then ax run on the body element, which is going to cascade all of the rule checks down to all the sub elements within body. Here we have an empty rules collection, but I want to show you what we can do if, for example, we wanted to disable the color contrast check. So I'm going to go ahead and paste in the color contrast rule. We're going to set the enabled property equal to false, and all of the rule descriptions that you can add here are on this rule descriptions markdown file on the ax core repository from DQ Labs on their GitHub. So let's go ahead and save that. And now that that's saved, let's head over to our terminal and run Nightwatch --tag inaccessible. And that's going to fire up that W3 inaccessible web page. And here's all of our failing tests. So let's scroll back up to the top here. You can see we have a mixture of some passing cases, but down here, when it starts to check things like the alt text on images, have a nice little output that images must have an alternate text. And it tells me what specific image is missing the alt text. So that's the border left top. And then there's also the same violation for border top.gif. And as you can see, there's a ton of image alts that are missing on this web page. And then we can go into the next rule set once we scroll past these. Here we get into labels. Form elements must have labels. Link name, links must have discernible text. And DQ University, who wrote this ax tool, have a really good website that lets you look up what these rules mean and exactly how to fix them. So here, for example, is links must have discernible text. It tells you how to fix the problem, which is very helpful in remediation. It tells you which WCAG rule sets it applies to and how serious the user impact is. And again, the good thing about this Nightwatch ax verbose package is that it tells you each control that's failed and why, so that you can go back to this DQ University website and see how to fix each and every one to bring your website back into compliance. So reach out to me to let me know if you found this tutorial useful for accessibility testing. Leave me a like if you did, or if you have any of your own tips for accessibility testing, let me know in the comments section. Before you go, please consider subscribing to my channel for more testing videos, and thanks for watching.